Hi, and welcome to Great Movie Scenes, the first series to discuss just that, great scenes from movies. I'm your host, Michelle Sabato, and today I'm joined by Mike Suglio. Mike is a professor, and he also started the Short and Sweet Film Festival here in Cleveland, Ohio. Hi, Mike.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great.
So we know that you know a lot about film. You know a lot about, major motion pictures, also a lot of indie film from what you do with your film fest. So we got you here today to talk to you about one of your favorite scenes from, I'm assuming, one of your favorite movies. Can you let us know what scene that you chose and what we're going to be seeing?
Sure, I chose the very classic baptism scene from the very first Godfather film.
Awesome. Okay, so let's play that for you right now, and then we'll come right back and talk all about it, because it's actually one of my favorite movies as well.
Exia Deo, et munde Spiritus et locum Spiritui Sancto Paraclito. Oremus, preces nostus, per Christum Domine nostrum. Amen. Michael, crucis Domine impressiones signatum, od magnitudines gloria tua rudimenta servans, per custodia mandatorum tuorum, ad regenerationis gloriam pervenire mediator, per quiendum Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen. Oremus omnipotens sempiterne Deus, Pater Domini nostri Iesu Christi respice dignatus super hanc famulum tuum, Michael, qui venturus est judicari vivus et mortus in saeculum perennium. Amen. Michael, accipe sal sapiense propitiasse tibi in vitam aeternam. Amen. Deus omnipotens Pater Domini nostri Iesu Christi, qui Dei regenerabit aquae Spiritus Sancto, qui de debitivi remissionem omnium peccatorum, iste te lineat Chrisma te salutis in eodum Christo Iesu Domine nostrum, in vitam aeternam. Amen. Ego te linea oleo salutis in Christo Iesu Domine nostrum, rabias vitam aeternam. Amen. Credes in Spiritum Sanctum, Sanctam Ecclesiam Catholicam, Sanctorum Communionem Remissionem Peccatorum, carnis resurrectionem et vitam aeternam. Credo. Exercite mundi Spiritus in nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti, ut exias et recedes ab hoc famulum Dei Michaeli, isienim tibi impere maledictit damnat. Effrata quores ad aperire, et adora suavitatis, tuatum effulgar diabli apocum guabereum judicium Dei. Michael, do you believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth?
I do.
Do you believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord?
I do.
Do you believe in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church?
I do.
Pater nostri qui es in caelo, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut in nos limitibus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. Michael, ingredere in templum Dei, ut habeas partem cum Christo in vitam aeternam. Amen. Credo in Deo Pater omnipotent, Creatorem caeli et terra, et in Iesum Christum Filii eius unigenitum Dominum nostrum, qui conceptus est Dei Spiritus Sancto, natus ex Maria Virgine, passus sub tuam scripinatum, crucifixus mortus et sepultus, descendere ad inferos, tertia die resurrexere ad mortus, ascendere ad caelos, sedere ad dextra Dei Patris omnipotente, inde venturus est judicare vivus et mortus. Credo in Spiritus Sancto, Sanctam Ecclesiam Catholicam, Sanctorum Communionem, Remissionem Peccatorum, Canus Resurrectionem, Vitam Aeternam. Amen. Michael Francis Rizzi, do you renounce Satan?
I do renounce him.
And all his works? father's palms?
I do renounce them.
Michael Rizzi, will you be baptized?
I
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Michael Rizzi, go in peace, and may the Lord be with you. Amen.
Okay, so let's talk about this. All right. So why did you pick this scene specifically?
Well, I do like The Godfather. It's probably one of my, I would say, top 10 favorite films. My side note, my two favorite films are Jurassic Park and Cinema Paradiso. But Godfather is in the top 10. I mainly use it as a lesson of two things in my class to take note. And I'll explain this as we watch a scene here. One is you really need to make sure you orient the viewer to know the space these characters are in.
Mhm.
And I think this does a fantastic job, especially at the beginning where we have a wide shot of the church and we slowly go into the baptism. So it's farther out and it creeps in. And a lot of times, first-time filmmakers will just immediately jump into the action, and I'll watch this and I'll be like, where are these characters? Like, and then the students will oftentimes be like, oh yeah, well, we're obviously at Cleveland State, or we're obviously at Case, so try to see, and it's just like, okay, I know that, but
Yeah.
imagine someone in LA wouldn't know that, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And then what it also does fantastic, and I feel like in many ways this film is ahead of its time, among many things, is it's very good at doing juxtaposition and cutaways.
Mhm.
So, a lot of times with online videos or in like popular television like Family Guy, a lot of the jokes, a lot of the setup is really set on, juxtapositioning two, contrasting scenes, one after each other here.
Yeah.
And The Godfather, as you've seen just now, the baptism scene, epitomizes that with, the beautiful, innocence of the sacred, baptism of a child, which is, by the way, that's Sofia Coppola, in case you guys didn't know that.
Yeah.
And then going to something just pure carnage, something so violent and destructive as a weapon, as a gun.
Yeah.
And it gives me chills. It gives me chills right now, even just thinking about it. And so that's my main lesson that I show to students about this film, among many other things in the scene, which we'll talk about. But that's the big picture of why I have the students watch this scene.
Well, and just to piggyback on that for a second, because both you and I are Italian Americans, and I know that there has been a lot of talk just about the movie in general. There's been many people who praise it, and then there are people who prefer not to see that, and they talk specifically about this scene because they're like, well, how can you show like something so sacred as a baptism that's so dear to our culture while also showing this, these heinous acts? And I think aside from just a cinematic setup of it's, showing these two opposing things, it's also showing about how a culture can have great parts and not so great parts. So I mean, to me, and I respect everyone's opinion, but specifically this scene kind of shows there's an overarch in the culture and what we brought over, and we're still tried and true to our religion, but we still do have bad parts, and sometimes they kind of cross over.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that you can make the case for that for really any culture,
Yeah.
But one of the things that's a takeaway from the scene also, and that's a very good point, is like throughout the film they talk about, well, just business, it's just work.
Yeah.
And we see a lot. That was another point I wanted to talk about, was we see these assassins, Clemenza and whoever, just getting ready for like a work day.
Yeah.
Like this is another day at work. And so they're doing their job, they're packing their suitcases, they're getting the sweat off their brow. Um and they're getting a haircut or a beard
Yeah.
trim or something, and then they go to work to be assassins. It's
Right.
just another work. And like it just happened on, the day of baptism, and Michael is having the baptism, and just like, hey, we did the job. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
The baptism, like
Right.
just another day in work,
Yeah. Well, and like something that you touched upon earlier when you were talking about like the cutaways and everything. I know there's a lot of you could get tons of books and like watch a bunch of content about the making of The Godfather and how hard it was for Coppola to, get Paramount to do it, how they wanted to constantly fire Al Pacino because he was like a no one. But a lot of the cinematography, he talks about like there's always like these cutaways of like oranges because it like looked really good on on the film. And how things that he learned from like when he studied, because he was really good friends with Scorsese and Spielberg. So
Right.
Coming out of that era of just coverage and having a lot of stuff for like the editor to really play with. I mean, I really couldn't imagine this scene, this movie, really any of the movies that came out of the 70s any other way. I mean, they just were so rich of these setting the scene, like you said. Do you think that maybe if this was took place in a different time, or with a different director, do you really think that they would have able to have encapsulated the world as much? I mean, I know that that's kind of a question that you can't really answer, but I guess like speak more of what the great things that you think Coppola
Yeah.
really
That
did to bring it all together.
Right. Why. That's a great question. I never thought, but I think it's interesting because when this film did premiere, organized crime was still very prominent. I mean, hell, it was still prominent in Cleveland at that
Yeah.
time when this movie premiered,
Yeah.
and I think people were more used to it because it wasn't necessarily a historical piece; it was a present piece.
Mm.
And I think um, I also really like Goodfellas a lot too. Irishman, is a very obviously very good film. I just thought it was not as strong as like a lot of these films that took place in the 70s, or even with Goodfellas late 80s, early 90s. I think that's 91 maybe. I don't know the year exactly, but it just, that time has passed.
Mhm.
Organized crime is not as in your face as it once was.
Right.
Just to be honest with you, my mom is from German heritage, and I remember she used to tell me, she's like, yeah, when I get married to an Italian, we were like used to joke like, oh, organized crime mafia.
Yeah.
My dad's a truck driver.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, that was just part of this thing at the time. But I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think this movie would have had as much of an impact as it does if it was made now, for two reasons. Like I said, is organized crime is not as prominent, but two is just like it's tough to have a film of both the well, I discredit the third one, but the two Godfather films, like The Irishman, are quite long epic films,
Right.
and they premiered in theaters.
Mhm.
Now we had that with Lord of the Rings, but if you think about it, in like the past, like, I don't know, 10 years, because like Lord of the Rings is pretty old at this point. How many films can you say besides like the Marvel's Avengers films that are
Yeah.
these long epics?
Right.
And
Right.
the reason why Irishman was able to be a success was you could watch it whenever and streaming Netflix. And I'll be honest with you, I did not watch that in one full sitting. I
I didn't
stopped
either.
and I made it episodic.
Yeah.
And that's really, you can do long form stories, and that's now the new craze. And to be honest with you, when we resume classes in the fall, I'm 100% shifting my class a little bit more to creating episodes, because that's now a thing in this
Yeah.
climate, and
Yeah.
with the rise of all Tiger King and whatever, that's just how things are. And with Godfather, with Irishman, is they are just long episodic, long form stories, and so that's really just how things going to go. And I don't think The Godfather would have been that much of. I think it would have been a success, but it would have been very challenging if it would have premiered in a theater right
Right.
now.
Yeah. And I think, with that scene in particular, because I mean, I could probably have an entire series of just me filming myself talking about Al Pacino because I just love him so much. So, I mean, but when you think about, the stories about how they wanted to recast him, like Coppola had to push up the Sollozzo scene where he shoots him in the restaurant because Paramount was going to fire him. And when you watch that scene in particular, he's not doing much, but what he's doing is so powerful with very little dialogue, very little movement, all of these cutaways, and you're still completely engaged with what he's doing. I mean, can you imagine, like, I think some of the names that they wanted to throw out is that they wanted to have Ryan O'Neal play Michael Corleone because he would be like a Northern Italian guy. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like when you watch that, you're so, or when you even think about The Godfather, a lot of people think of Brando. I instantly think of Pacino.
Yeah.
Like
Same.
that's who
Yeah.
that movie is him. So I mean, could you imagine if that was recast? Like, I don't even want to, I get emotional.
Yes. So what Pacino does very well is he uses the power of silence
Yeah.
to his advantage. And so the quick comparison I can think of is Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men.
Oh, mhm.
So they're two very strong, stoic characters. In the I studied Chekhov. In the land of Chekhov, they would be molding in their
Mhm.
movements, and they use silence to their advantage because it forces you as a viewer to only be using one sense. You're just like immediately just watching them, and you're not also like listening to them talk, and it
Right.
just lets you just take it all in. So yeah, Pacino does a great job, and it's before his voice was super hoarse. He was like, I'm Al Pacino.
I
Yeah.
know. Well, and that's the thing. Like when a lot of people, when you mention Al Pacino, they'll say like, I'm out of order, you're out of order, and like all of these
Yeah.
like scenes where he's like screaming and stuff like that. But for me, like this scene or how he transitions into The Godfather, where he has a couple outbursts, but I mean, he's just really more silent, and he's in his thoughts, he's calculating. That for me, when you come from Pacino's background of being a theater actor, you're taught to project, you're taught to, you need to be seen and heard. And what he's doing, when you watch it, you kind of feel like, oh, he's not really doing anything. And then at the end, you're like, oh, but he's doing everything.
Right.
He's just, like I said, I could have a 90-day kind of like breakdown of like my love for Al Pacino.
Oh.
But so yeah, with The Godfather specifically, I talked to others about movies from the 70s or actors from the 70s, and there was just kind of like this real quality about them. And because you do teach, I was also trained in the Meisner technique.
Mhm.
I also taught Meisner for a bit of time.
So
And a
do
couple
I,
of the
actually.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. But I mean, like all of that is just about like being real, living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. And I feel like a lot of those key takeaways of training, whether it be, Stanislavski or Adler or Meisner, you have a master course in the movies from the 70s. So is that one of the reasons too that you can relate to The Godfather or just films from the 70s in general, because you have that training that it kind of ties it all together for you?
I think actually, same with Hitchcock films, is one of the key elements of films made up to that point is they didn't rely too heavy on like CGI
Yeah.
or and I'm not even talking about just like CGI like robots fighting each other or something. I'm talking
Yeah.
about just like even just like basic graphics or transitions is just pure cinema.
Right.
And what's nice is and this is why I have the students watch this, is they have all the same tools as you do,
Mhm.
and sure they had cranes obviously, and they had better cinema cameras, but a lot of the core elements of lights, camera, audio is what you can have, that you could probably get online for, a couple hundred. You could get all those tools pretty
Yeah.
easily and get started. Um, so and that's the thing, is like what's nice about this scene is it's also um one of the first like really big like non-linear scenes of going from here to here to here.
Yeah.
Whereas up to that point, a lot of films were pretty linear, and so they were pretty straightforward how to shoot and film those. So yeah, that's mainly actually why I have them watch like scenes from these films, is they have a lot of the similar tools as Coppola did at this
Mhm.
point.
Yeah. So I mean, and again, this is not a knock at any of the bigger budget films at all, because they are great and they are cinema. But it's really might be helpful to go back to some of these films where they're not easy to make, but they do have things that you could easily, are easily at your disposal. Especially if you're a new filmmaker, or if you're really just trying to study filmmaking to like from the bottom up.
Hmm.
Are there any other films from that era that you suggest to your students, or is it really just The Godfather because it is the
Oh,
best?
I mean, I use the opening scene from The Godfather to demonstrate dramatic and top lighting a
Okay.
lot. And top lighting has had a little bit of a resurgence recently. Top lighting, if everyone doesn't know, it's this idea that the light's obviously coming from the top, but it creates a shadow right here, so the eyes aren't
Mm,
as present. So it's a very good tool to use if you have a character that's a little not trustworthy.
yeah.
You can't, because if you think about it, we, like it or not, always look into people's eyes when we're
Yeah.
we're talking. I don't sometimes because I'm thinking,
Right.
but like
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, you're looking at someone when you're talking to them.
Yeah.
And so when you cover that in cinema, and they do this obviously the opening scene of Godfather, you're just like, can I really trust this person? I can't really look into
Mm,
their eyes there. I use Vertigo a lot. I use Vertigo a lot for blocking, actually. So Hitchcock is a master at blocking his films. Um, and so that's probably, yeah. So I would say Vertigo, Godfather, and then most of my other films I use are films that are pretty recent, or like pop culture recently films, because I would love to just like have the students just like look at Citizen Kane and Maltese
mm,
Falcon, and I'm sure they've seen most of these films here, but I want to pick a film that I go, okay, I know you watched this growing up. You had to watch this growing up.
yeah.
Like Jurassic Park, you had to
Right.
watch this at some point, or
Yeah.
Star Wars, and then it's like, okay, we all have seen this. Now let's actually talk about this professionally,
Hmm.
and so I think like a lot of times film professors get muddled down and just going through the classics, and that's great and you should do that, but these students haven't seen all the classics. To be honest, I haven't seen every single classic film. It just is what it is. There's so many films out there.
Right.
So that's why, again, I try to pick things that even like, for example, I use The Dark Knight and Inception because I love Nolan, and I figured they've probably seen it, but then I also use films that I despise, I assume they've seen, like Suicide Squad.
Oh.
I'm like, this is everything they do incorrectly. That's at least my style. So
Yeah. So if you had to sum up this scene, the baptism
mhm.
slash carnage scene, what are like just a few takeaways that you would give if one of your students was like, you know what, I want to make a film, I want to make something compelling, and you hand them this scene? What are just a couple of things that you would say as encouragement for them to watch the scene and maybe do something along the same vein?
Well, besides just creating enough wide shots and coverage, like you said, and as you know, I do a lot of documentaries, and coverage is crucial for that. Um, but I think one of the key things I haven't talked about yet in this interview is the idea of always remembering the human aspect of things. So, like, again, we touched on this, that they're doing their jobs. They're assassins. That's just their job, and they're just getting ready for the day.
Yeah.
but they're also just doing normal human activities, like the juxtaposition of you know, baptizing the baby with the cloth and then them wiping their brows. You know, sure, that's there for a reason, but also they're wiping the brows because it's hot. They're wearing suits. It's
Yeah.
you know, warmer weathers, and that's what normal people do. They're people acting like people,
Right.
and that's something that a lot of times people forget, and that may not, you know, that element may not be actually in the script. It may not be on Clemenza's wiping his brow as he walks up the stairs, you know,
Right.
but that's something that the director is then going to choose, or the talented actor is just going to do naturally.
Mhm.
And so that's something to always keep in mind when you're going out and making these films, is how can you are a human being making a film with human beings to be watched by other human beings. So that's something you really need to think
Yeah. Well, awesome. I mean, I'm very glad that you chose this scene. It's one of my favorite films, and honestly, like that whole scene to me, it it pretty much epitomizes all of the characters of
Yeah.
showing that they were once these great innocent children, and then they kind of just go through life and things turn sometimes. And yeah, I mean, I think it's that scene in itself is just speaks to the larger theme of the story of the family, of the culture. And it also has these great cinematic technical takeaways like you were explaining. So thank you so much for picking that. And like I said, if you want to watch my other show that I might be producing where I'm just talking about Al Pacino, I'll release that too.
Oh,
But
sure.
thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining me. And thanks again for watching Great Movie Scenes, the first series about just that, great scenes from movies. We look forward to seeing you next time, and we hope you enjoyed what we chatted about today. Bye, Mike. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.